Chapter 1, The Word at the Gate. The morning came to Caleb Wren the way all his mornings came now. Gray at the window, cold in the grate, and silent as a held breath. He rose before the sun the way a man rises who has no one to rise for, only cattle and habit. He built the fire small, because a small fire was all one man needed, and set the coffee on to boil while the dark still lay heavy on the yard. His hands knew the work without his mind attending to it, the strike of the match, the crack of kindling, the tin cup lifted from the same nail it had hung on for 11 years. He did not whistle. He did not talk to the dog he no longer had. The house made its own sounds, the settling of old timber, and he had long since stopped expecting anything to answer. Out the eastern window, up on the low rise past the corral, there stood a fence no cow ever leaned on, a square of whitewashed pickets no bigger than a bed, and inside it 2 stones. One was cut for a woman. The smaller one was cut for something that had not lived long enough to earn a name, though Caleb had given it one anyway, quietly, only once, the day he set it in the ground. He looked up at the rise every morning the way another man might check the weather. Then he looked away and drank his coffee standing and went out to the day. He was mending the north gate when the wagon foundered. He heard it before he saw it, the wrong sound of a wheel gone loose on its axle, a groan of dry wood, and then the long, tearing crash of something heavy coming apart at speed. When he came around the fence line at a run, he saw the miner's wagon canted hard into the wash by the creek. One wheel spun off entire and the whole load slid sideways, and beneath the tilted bed, pinned under a fallen crate and the corner of the frame, a man. Caleb did not shout. He got his shoulder under the frame and heaved, and the wood came up an inch, and then another, and he dragged the man clear by the collar the way you drag a calf from a bog, steady, no wasted motion. But he had seen enough hurt men to know the truth of this one before he had him half free. The chest was stove in. There was blood at the mouth, dark and slow, and the man's skin had the gray shine of a fever that had been burning long before the wagon ever tipped. "Easy," Caleb said. It was the first word he had spoken aloud in 2 days. "Easy now, I've got you." The man's eyes rolled and found him. "The girl," he said, the words came wet. "My girl." Caleb turned his head, and there in the shadow of the ruined wagon bed, wedged behind a flour sack with her knees drawn up under her chin, was a child. A little thing, maybe 7, with a tangle of dark hair and eyes gone enormous and dry in a dirty face. She did not cry. She did not make a sound at all. She only watched him the way a wild thing watches from a burrow, deciding whether the shape at the mouth of it means to kill her. "She's all right," Caleb said. "Not a mark on her, you hear me? She's all right." Something went out of the man then, some cord that had held him taut. He let his head fall back against Caleb's arm. Caleb carried him inside. The man weighed almost nothing, all fever and bone, and Caleb laid him on the bed that had been his own and no one else's for 11 years, and pulled off the ruined boots and saw at once there was nothing under the shirt that any doctor, had there been one within 40 miles, could have set right. He got water into the man. He did the small, useless things a body does. And the man, who had the sense that dying men sometimes have, took Caleb's wrist in a grip that still had iron left in it, and would not let it go. "Don't lie to me," the miner said. "I've buried enough men to know the look. Don't waste it lying." Caleb was quiet a moment. "No," he said, "I won't." "Amos," the man's chest labored. "Amos Teller." That's the girl's name too. Teller, Nell Teller." He said it carefully, the way a man says a thing he needs written down. "She's got no one. Her ma's 3 years gone. There's no aunt, no grandmother, no one, just me, and I'm spent." "Rest," Caleb said. "I'll rest soon enough." Amos's eyes cut toward the doorway, and Caleb followed them, and there she was, the child, come silent as smoke to the threshold, one small hand fisted around a rag doll with a stitch-shut smile, watching her father die and making no sound. Amos looked at her a long moment, and his ruined face did a thing that was worse to see than any wound. Then he looked back at Caleb, and his voice dropped, low and fierce and fast, meant for one man only. "They'll put her in the county workhouse," he said. "You know they will. A miner's brat with no papers and no kin, they'll have her scrubbing floors for her keep and calling it charity before I'm cold. I've seen those places. I've seen what comes out of 'em and what don't come out at all." His grip tightened. "I got nothing to pay you, nothing but this." His other hand fumbled at his shirt and drew out 2 things and pressed them into Caleb's palm and closed Caleb's fingers over them with both of his own. A folded paper, soft and greasy with handling, worn near through at the creases. And a locket, cheap tin, the plating rubbed to base metal at the edges, on a bit of leather cord. The paper's my claim up in the hills. Worthless. Everybody says worthless. But it's hers, it's all that's hers, so you keep it for her. He was fighting for each word now. The locket was her mother's. Don't let him take that. Whatever else, not that. Caleb looked down at the man. He was aware of the girl in the doorway, and of the 2 stones on the hill through the window, and of 11 silent years, and of the particular weight of a promise, which he knew better than most men living, because he had made exactly 2 in his life and buried them both up on that rise. "I'm no one's father," he said. It was not a refusal. It was only the truth laid down honest between them because the man had asked him not to lie. "I ain't asking you to be her father," Amos breathed. "I'm asking you to keep her, that's all, keep her from that place. Keep her safe." His eyes were beginning to lose their hold on the room, drifting, coming back by force of will alone. "A man's word, that's all I got left to trust in. Give me your word." And Caleb, who did not give his word lightly, who had not given it to anyone in over a decade because he had had no one to give it to, felt the 2 small hard shapes in his closed hand, paper and tin, a stake and a mother's face. And he thought of that little whitewashed square on the hill, and how a smaller stone than a man deserves is a terrible thing to cut. He said, "You have it." Amos went still, not gone yet, but eased, the fight running out of him all at once like water from a cracked jug. "Say it," he whispered. "So she hears." Caleb turned his head so the child in the doorway could see his mouth make the words. "I'll keep her," he said, plain and unhurried, the way he'd say a thing he meant to do and would do. "She'll not see the inside of any workhouse, not while I'm breathing. You've my word on it, Amos, tell her, and I don't break my word, not ever." Something in the miner's face let go. It was not a smile, quite, but it was near enough to peace that Caleb would remember it a long time. Amos looked past him one last time to the small figure in the door. "Nell," he said. "Nell, girl, be good. Your pa loves you, your pa." The breath went out of him and did not come back. For a while Caleb did not move. The fire ticked in the grate. Outside a jay called once and was quiet. He reached up at last and closed the dead man's eyes with 2 fingers, gentle as he'd close a book, and drew the blanket to the still chest. Then he opened his hand and looked at what was in it. The claim paper, soft as cloth, the tin locket dull in the gray light. He thumbnailed the little clasp and it opened, and inside was a faded scrap of a woman's likeness cut small, and behind that, folded impossibly tight, another slip of paper he did not unfold. He closed it again. He would look later. There was a child in the doorway. He turned to her slowly, the way you turn to a colt you don't want to spook, and lowered himself down so his eyes were level with hers, and stayed there, not reaching, not speaking, until he was sure she was looking at him and not through him. "Your name's Nell," he said. She said nothing. Her fist tightened on the doll. "Mine's Caleb. This is my house. You'll be safe in it." He let a silence sit, gentle, unhurried, the way he let ground settle after a rain. "I told your pa I'd keep you, and I will. You don't have to talk to me. You don't have to like me. But you're not going anywhere you don't want to go, and no one's taking you anywhere I don't allow. That's a promise, and I don't break my word." He waited. She looked at him with those enormous dry eyes, and Caleb had the strange sense of being measured by something far older than 7 years. Then, without a word, without a tear, she crossed to the far corner of the room, farthest from the bed and farthest from him, and folded herself down into it with her back to the wall and her knees drawn up, and the doll pressed hard against her chest. He did not go to her. He knew, in a way he could not have said aloud, that going to her now would be the wrong thing, that some griefs must be let alone until they are ready to be near. So he built the fire up a little, though he'd meant to keep it small, and he set the coffee pot back over it, and he sat down in the one good chair where she could see him, a big still shape between her and the door, and he kept watch. She slept at last, curled in the corner with the doll under her chin, and her eyes squeezed shut against the day. Caleb sat through the whole of it without moving, the dead man on the bed and the living child in the corner, and on the hill through the window, the 2 small stones going bright, and then gold, and then dark as the sun crossed over them. He turned the tin locket in his fingers slow, and did not sleep, and kept his word. Chapter 2, 2 Strangers Under One Roof. They buried Amos on the hill the next morning, in the cold blue hour before the sun cleared the ridge. Caleb dug the grave himself. He would not let old Pate spell him at it, though the old man offered twice, standing at the edge of the hole with his hat crushed in his knuckles. There was a proper way to do a thing like this, and Caleb had learned it the hard way years back on this same hill, with 2 other graves he never spoke of. The dirt came up dark and heavy with the night's frost, and his breath smoked, and he swung the shovel until his shoulders burned because the burning was easier than the quiet. The girl watched from the fence line. Nell had not slept in the bed he'd made up for her. He'd found her at first light curled in the corner by the cold stove, the rag doll jammed under her chin, her eyes open and fixed on nothing. She had followed him out when he shouldered the shovel, keeping a careful 10 paces behind, as though he were a strange dog that might turn. Now she stood at the fence with her small hands wrapped around the top rail and her chin resting on them, and she watched her father go into the ground, and she did not make a sound. Caleb had thought she might cry. He had braced for it the way a man braces for a fall. He almost wished she would. Crying he could have understood. This dry, wide-eyed silence was something else, something that sat in his chest like a stone. "You want to say words over him?" he asked her when the last of it was smoothed and mounded. He'd propped a flat stone at the head, not carved yet. He'd carve it later when his hands were steadier. "It's proper to say words." Nell looked at the grave. She looked at Caleb. She said nothing at all. Pate cleared his throat and mumbled something about the Lord being a shepherd, and the wind took most of it. When he was done, the 3 of them stood there a while, and then the girl turned and walked back down toward the house alone, small and straight-backed, the doll swinging from one fist. "That's a hurt child," Pate said quietly. "I know it. Ain't the crying kind? Those are the ones you got to watch." Pate settled his hat back on his head. "Buried a girl of my own long time gone. She went dry-eyed too, like she decided crying wouldn't fix it, so why waste the water?" He squinted down the hill after Nell. Smart in a way, sad mostly. Caleb didn't answer. He picked up the shovel and followed the child down. He was no cook, and the second morning proved it past all argument. He meant to make it right for her flapjacks, the way he half remembered his own mother turning them, golden and soft. What he produced instead was a skillet of blackened, smoking ruin that set the whole cabin to reeking and sent him cursing under his breath to fling the pan out the door. When he turned back red-faced, Nell was watching him from the table with an expression he couldn't read. Not fear this time, something closer to wonder that a grown man could be so useless. "I'll do better," he told her. "Give me a day or 2, I'll figure the trick of it." She said nothing, but she ate the bread and molasses he set before her, every crumb, and she watched him the whole time like she was taking his measure. He didn't know how to be around her. That was the plain truth of it, and it shamed him. He'd run cattle across 1,000 acres, faced down rustlers and blizzards and a bank man once with a pistol on his hip, but he could not for the life of him find the way to speak to one small girl. He tried too hard, hovering, offering her his own coat, asking 3 times if she was warm enough until she flinched. Then, ashamed of the hovering, he swung the other way and left her be so entirely that she trailed after him to the barn just to keep him in sight. "You're farming her like she's a hard field," Pate observed around noon, chewing a straw. He'd come to lean in the barn door and watch Caleb pretend to mend a harness that didn't need it. "Push, then pull, then push. Girl don't know whether she's coming or going. Neither do you. You got better notions, old man, I'm listening." "Feed her, don't lecture her," Pate spat. "Child that just lost her daddy don't need a speech about being warm enough. She needs to know supper's coming and the man who says it means it. That's all. You feed a thing regular and quiet, pretty soon it stops expecting the boot." He pushed off the door frame. "You knew that once. About horses, anyhow. Same principle, fewer teeth." Caleb almost smiled. It had been a long while since anything had come close to pulling one out of him. That evening he didn't hover. He set 2 plates down, stew this time, which a man could hardly ruin, and he ate his own and said only, "There's more in the pot, you want it." And when Nell had cleaned her plate, she sat a moment, and then she got up and, wary as a barn cat, held her bowl out toward the stove. He filled it. He didn't say a word about it. It felt absurdly like the biggest thing he'd done all year. She ran on the 3rd night. He woke to the wrongness of the house, that instinct a man gets that the shape of the dark has changed, and found the corner by the stove empty, the blanket thrown back, the doll gone. His heart did a thing it hadn't done in years. He was out the door in his stockinged feet with the lantern before he'd finished thinking, and the cold hit him like water, and he stood in the yard turning slow, saying her name low so as not to frighten her worse. "Nell, Nell, girl." Nothing. The mountains stood black against a sky thick with stars. A child could walk off into that country and never be found. The thought put a fist around his throat. Then he saw it, the barn door, standing a hand's width open that he knew he'd latched. She was in the far stall, wedged down in the straw between the wall and the flank of the old bay mare, who stood over her placid and warm and unbothered. The doll was clutched to her chest. Her eyes came up to the lantern light, and in them was the thing he'd been waiting 3 days to see. Not defiance, not anger, but a raw and drowning terror that he would drag her out and scold her and send her off somewhere worse. Caleb did not drag her out. He did not scold. He set the lantern down on a barrel, turned the wick low, and lowered himself into the straw with his back against the stall boards, a careful arm's length from her. He drew his knees up and rested his forearms on them and looked out at nothing, the way he'd sit at a fire. "Cold out to run tonight," he said to the dark. "I generally think better in the barn myself. Horses don't ask a man questions." She didn't answer. He hadn't expected her to. So he stayed. He sat there in the hay-smelling dark with the mare shifting her weight and blowing soft through her nose, and he did not reach for the child, and he did not tell her to come inside, and he did not leave. When the cold got into his bones, he only pulled his own coat tighter and stayed. Somewhere past the deepest part of the night he felt, rather than saw, the small warmth of her ease closer along the boards, not touching, but nearer, the way a wild thing tests whether the world will hold still long enough to be trusted. He was still there when the gray light came up gray in the cracks of the wall, stiff as a fence post, one leg gone to sleep. Nell was asleep at last against the mare's foreleg, the doll fallen slack in her arms. He carried her in and laid her in the good bed, and this time she did not wake, and this time she stayed. The crack came 4 days after that, and it came over her hair. It had gone to a wild, matted tangle no comb had touched since her father died, and Caleb had been eyeing it the way a man eyes a chore he dreads. He found her one morning fighting it herself, dragging her father's broken comb through the snarls with her face screwed up and her eyes bright with pain and stubbornness both. "Here," he said before he could think better of it. "Let me, I've done it before." He had once, a lifetime ago, on hair the color of wheat, on a head that had barely learned to hold itself up before the fever took her and her mother both. He didn't say that. He knelt behind the child and took the comb and worked the tangles loose the slow way, from the ends up, one hand cupped against her scalp so the pulling wouldn't sting. Nell went rigid. Then, by degrees, she didn't. His fingers had forgotten the trick of it, and what he produced was a lopsided, lumpy rope of a braid that listed to one side like a drunk leaving a saloon. He tied it off with a strip of harness leather because he had nothing better, and he sat back, and Nell reached up and felt along the length of it with one hand. "It's crooked," Caleb admitted. "I'll get better at it." And the girl looked back over her shoulder at him. The first time she'd truly looked at him, met his eyes on purpose and held them, and she didn't smile, not quite, but something moved across her face like sun crossing a field. Then she turned front again and let him be, and left the crooked braid exactly as it was, and wore it all that day like she'd decided to keep it. Caleb went out to the yard and stood a while with his hat off and the wind on his face, and he was not sure what to call the thing that had come loose in his chest. He only knew he'd not felt it in a long, long time. It was Pate who brought the shadow home, riding in from town near dusk with the mail and a look Caleb didn't like. "Talk in town," the old man said, not getting down off his horse. "Woman at the mercantile asked me straight out, was it true you'd taken in a miner's orphan up here with no kin and no papers to her?" He worked his jaw. "Word travels. Sheriff Dahl was standing right there, didn't say much, but he heard it." "Let him hear it." "Caleb," Pate leaned down over the saddle horn, and his gruffness had gone quiet and grave. "There's a county workhouse 40 mile east, and it don't fill itself. They take orphans with no papers. It's the law, and the law's got a quota to make, and a girl with no mother and a dead father, and not one line of writing to say who she belongs to." He stopped. "I'm only telling you what's out there. So you're not caught flat." Caleb looked up the hill, toward the fresh grave and the 2 old ones beside it, and then back toward the lit window of the house, where a small, crooked braid was bent over a plate. "She belongs here," he said. "I gave my word." "I know it." Pate straightened and gathered his reins. "I'm just not sure your word's the kind of paper they mean." Chapter 3, The Schoolteacher. Caleb had faced down a lightning-spooked herd in a river gorge, and he had once set his own broken finger with a bootlace and a curse, and neither of those things had made his hands sweat the way the main street of town did on a bright Tuesday morning. He sat the wagon stiff as a fence post, reins bunched too tight in his fist, and beside him on the plank seat sat Nell, small and silent, her doll clamped under one arm and her boots not near reaching the floorboards. She had let him braid her hair again that morning. It had come out crooked, one plait fat and one thin, and he had not the first idea how to fix it, so he had left it and hoped no one would look too close. Everyone looked. That was the trouble with towns. Whole world's got somewhere to be, old Pate had said that morning, leaning on the corral rail, watching Caleb hitch the team. Except you. You just got a girl who needs her letters and a man too stubborn to ask for help getting 'em. I can get her to a schoolhouse, Caleb had said. Getting her there ain't the part I'd worry over. Pate had spat, grinning through his gray whiskers. It's the talking, you recall how that goes? Words, little ones and big ones, strung together polite. Caleb recalled, he just didn't care for it. He drew the team up outside the mercantile and set the brake and sat a moment, gathering himself the way a man gathers before cold water. Down the street, past the land office and the bank, the schoolhouse stood white-painted and plain, a little bell drowsing in its cupola. Children's voices drifted from the yard, high and careless, and Caleb felt Nell go rigid beside him. You don't have to talk to none of 'em, he told her low. Just go and learn your letters and come home, that's all. She said nothing. She hadn't said much of anything in the 3 weeks since the hill. He'd stopped expecting her to. He lifted her down. Her hand, when it found his sleeve, gripped a fistful of it and did not let go, and Caleb walked the length of that street with a 7-year-old fused to his arm and every eye in town, he was sure, weighing the pair of them and finding the arithmetic strange. The schoolyard emptied at the bell. Inside, the room smelled of chalk dust and pine oil and the Swedish rot of a wood stove not lit since spring. And there, sleeves pushed to the elbow, wiping down a slate with a rag, was the schoolteacher. She was younger than he'd figured a schoolteacher for, and not near as severe. Dark hair pinned up loose, a smudge of chalk along one cheekbone, and a way of looking up at a person that took the whole of them in at once and reserved its opinion. A widow, folks said. He couldn't have said why he knew that. He supposed everybody knew everybody's grief in a town this size. Good morning, she said, and set down her rag. Morning, Caleb turned his hat brim in his hands. I come to, that is, the girl, she'll be wanting schooling. The teacher's gaze moved off him entirely, which he found he did not mind, because it landed on Nell. She came around the desk and crouched, not reaching, not cooing, just settling herself down to a child's height as easy as sitting to supper. Hello, she said. I'm Mrs. Myra Ellison. This is my schoolhouse. A pause. And that is a very fine doll. Nell's arm tightened over the doll. She's got a stitched-on mouth, Myra went on, conversational as if they had all day, which apparently she did. So she can keep a secret. That's a useful sort of friend to have. What's her name? Caleb waited for the silence. It always came. Nell looked at strangers the way a barn cat looks at a boot. Prudence, Nell said. The word dropped into the quiet room, and Caleb near dropped his hat. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of yes and no nods, of a cup pushed away, of a small back turned to the wall, and she gave up a whole word, a whole name, to a woman she'd known the length of a breath. Myra didn't so much as blink at the wonder of it. Prudence, she repeated, grave and respectful. A sensible name. Would Prudence care to sit up front by the window? The good light's there. Nell considered this with the seriousness of a land treaty. Then, slowly, she unpeeled her fist from Caleb's sleeve and walked to the front bench and sat, doll upright beside her, facing the window and the morning. Caleb stood where he was, jilted and glad all at once, a feeling he had no name for. Myra rose and came to him, and now her look did return to him, and it had cooled a shade. She'll do well enough, she said, quiet, so the child wouldn't hear. Children are stronger than we like to think, though it'd help me to know what I'm working with, mister. Caleb, just Caleb'll do. Just Caleb, a faint dry note there, not unkind, but not the least bit impressed either. And the girl's yours. She's mine to keep. He heard how it sounded and didn't soften it. Her pa passed. Wagon went over on him out by my place. He asked me to see to her, and I gave my word I would, so I mean to. Something shifted behind Mara's eyes then, not pity, he'd have bristled at pity. More like recalculation, a sum coming out different than she'd started it. You gave your word, she said. I did. To a stranger, dying. Wouldn't matter if he'd been dying or dancing. I gave it. She studied him a long moment, and Caleb held still under it the way he'd hold still for a doctor. Well, she said at last, that's more than most men manage on their best day. Then briskly the softness folded away. But keeping a child isn't a fence to be mended once and forgotten, just Caleb. She's grieving. You understand that? Not sad, grieving. It doesn't come out in tears most times in a little one. It comes out sideways, in running off, in going quiet, in wetting the bed, in temper over nothing at all. She hides in the barn, Caleb admitted before he decided to. Nights. Of course she does, Myra said it gently now. She's looking for a place small enough to feel safe in. Don't drag her out of it. Don't make her wrong for it either. Just, she tilted her head, searching for it. Just be where she can find you. That's the whole of it in the beginning. Be findable. Caleb turned that over. It sounded like nothing. It sounded also exactly like the thing he had done, sitting in the straw beside her till dawn without a word, and he wondered how this woman had known that when he hadn't known it himself. I sat with her, he said. In the barn, didn't say nothing, just sat. Myra's mouth did something at the corner that was nearly a smile. Then you're not as hopeless as you look, Mr. Caleb. She glanced at his hat, still revolving in his hands. You can stop murdering that hat now. She's enrolled. Obliged. He put it on, took it off again, uncertain what a man did with his head in a schoolhouse. Is there a fee for the schooling? There's a fee. It's paid in firewood come winter and in you fetching her on time and sober, which I don't imagine will strain you. She held his eye. And in this, when she talks, and she'll talk to me before she talks to you, and you'll want a mind that it doesn't sting, you listen like it's the last water in the desert. Every word. You hear me. It already stung, Caleb said before he could stop it. The name just now. The look she gave him then was different from all the others, quick and startled and warm, the look of a person who had not expected the plain truth from a hard man and found she liked it. Yes, she said softly. I imagine it did. Give it time. The ones they love last are the ones they can't afford to lose. You'll be last, Caleb. That's not the insult it feels like. He didn't have an answer for that. He had the strangest sense of having been read clean through, cover to cover, and set gently back on the shelf. It was not a comfortable feeling. It was not, he found, an unwelcome one either. He left Nell at the front bench with the good light on her crooked braids and Prudence keeping her stitched-mouth counsel, and he walked back out into the street feeling lighter by a weight he hadn't known he'd been hauling. Which was the only reason, he'd tell himself later, that he noticed the man at the land office at all. A stranger stood at the counter there, framed in the open door, a tall, trim figure in a townsman's dark coat too clean for these parts, a low, pleasant voice pitched to carry no farther than it must. Caleb wouldn't have marked him, except the clerk's voice carried better. Abandoned claims, you understand, the clerk was saying. Fellow walks off a stake, don't work it a season, why, it's fair game for the next man to file. Just so, the stranger's voice was smooth as poured cream. And the paperwork on such a lapsed claim, say, out in the played-out diggings east of here, that would all be a matter of public record. Public as Sunday, mister. How convenient. The stranger set something on the counter, a coin, from the ring of it. For the clerk's trouble, I do like a town that keeps its records tidy. Caleb didn't slow. It was none of his business, a townsman poking at old mine papers. The hills were full of dead claims and the men who liked to pick their bones. He climbed to the wagon seat and gathered the reins and put the fellow out of his mind, or nearly. But something in him, some old cattleman's instinct for a wolf sign at the edge of the firelight, filed the man's face away without asking leave. The clean coat, the soft voice, the coin ringing on the counter. He'd remember it. Later, when it mattered, he'd remember it. For now he sat the wagon in the sun and found he was in no hurry to leave. He waited out the whole school day, though he'd meant to run errands and come back. He mended a trace that didn't need mending. He watered the team twice. And when the little bell finally rang and Nell came flying down the schoolhouse steps, flying, this child who 3 weeks ago would not cross a room, she pulled up short of the wagon, remembering herself, and walked the last of it. How'd it go then? Caleb asked, hoisting her up. She looked at her boots. Mrs. Ellison says Prudence can come again. A silence. Then, in a rush, as if it cost her, can we? Tomorrow. Caleb looked down the street to where Mara Ellison stood in her schoolhouse door, watching them go, chalk on her cheek and the afternoon gold behind her, and he found he did not have to reach far for the answer. "Yeah," he said. "We can come tomorrow." And he was honest enough, jolting home through the long light with the child quiet and easy at his side, to know that the wanting wasn't all Nell's. Chapter 4, Small Hands, Full House. The weeks after that first day in town wore a groove into the road between the ranch and the schoolhouse, and Caleb found he did not mind the walking of it. It began, as such things do, with a reason. Mara said Nell was behind in her letters, that a child who'd spent a year in mining camps couldn't be expected to know her sums, and that she would come out to the ranch of a Thursday to set the girl right. Caleb had said that was kind of her and meant it, and had not let himself examine why he'd shaved that Thursday morning before the sun was full up, nor why he'd told old Pate to keep the yard swept. Pate noticed everything. "Swept it yesterday," the old man said, leaning on his rake with the grin of a man who has learned a secret worth keeping. "Reckon it'll want sweeping again come Thursday, and Friday, clear through to Christmas, the way things are trending." "Get on," Caleb told him. Pate got on, chuckling, and Caleb stood a while at the gate looking down the road as if he could hurry the day by watching for it. Mara came in a little trap she drove herself, and by the third Thursday Nell was running to meet her before the wheels had stopped, which was a thing Caleb marked and did not speak of. The girl who had come to him silent, who had slept a week in the corner with her doll clutched to her chest and would not be touched, now stood on the porch rail and called out lessons she'd memorized just to show them off. "A is for apple," Nell announced, "and B is for barn, and C is for Caleb, and Miss Mara says I'm the quickest she ever taught." "Did she now?" Caleb said. "She did," Nell tipped her chin up, daring him to doubt it. "You can ask her." "I believe you," he said, and something in the plain way he said it made the girl beam like he'd handed her the moon. The lessons happened at the kitchen table, the good afternoon light coming in slantwise, and Caleb found errands that kept him near. A harness to mend, a hinge to oil. He was not fooling anyone, least of all himself, but there was a comfort in the sound of them, Mara's low, patient voice, Nell sounding out a word 3 times before she got it, and then the two of them laughing at some small triumph. The house had been quiet a long time. A man could forget what a house sounded like when it was living. Caleb had forgotten. He was remembering now, a piece at a time, the way you'd warm a cold hand at a fire slow, so it didn't ache. Nell took to the place the way spring takes to a field. She followed Pate through his chores and learned to scatter feed for the chickens, spilling half of it at first and then, one proud morning, none. She named the barn Cats. She insisted on carrying the egg basket, though it was near as big as she was, and cried the day she dropped it, not for the eggs, but because she'd meant to do it right and hadn't. Caleb had knelt in the straw and told her a dropped basket was the smallest kind of trouble a person could have, that he'd dropped worse and been forgiven, and she'd studied his face to see if it was true and decided it was. Then there was the lamb. It came of a ewe that died bearing twins, and one of the pair too weak to fight for a place at another mother. Caleb would have let nature take it. That was the way of a ranch, and he was not a soft man about such things. But Nell found the shivering thing in the pen and looked up at him with her whole heart in her face, and he heard himself say she could try to save it if she was willing to do the work. She was willing, she was ferocious about it. She warmed milk and fed it from a bottle every few hours, and when it was too cold at night she wanted it by the stove, and Caleb, who had said no to grown men over less, said yes to a 7-year-old over a lamb. It lived. She called it Biscuit, and it followed her everywhere on its knobbed legs, and the first time she called across the yard, "Come on home, Biscuit," Caleb stopped with a bucket in each hand and stood very still. "Home." She'd said it plain, without thinking, the way you'd say a word you'd always known. He carried the buckets on before anyone saw his face. The suppers were how it happened between him and Mara, though neither of them would have called it happening. She stayed for supper on the Thursdays because it was a long drive back and it would be near dark, and it was only sense. Caleb was no cook, but he could manage, and she'd pushed up her sleeves the second week and said she'd not sit and watch a man ruin good beef, and after that they cooked together more or less, which is to say they got in each other's way in a small kitchen and pretended not to notice how often it happened. Their hands met over the washing up. That was the plain fact of it. She'd wash and he'd dry, or he'd wash and she'd dry, and every few plates their fingers would brush in the passing, and every few times neither of them would pull away as quick as they might have. There was a whole conversation in it that never used a word. One evening the work was done and Nell asleep, and the two of them found themselves on the porch with the dark coming down soft and the stars pricking out one at a time over the ridge. Myra held her shawl close. Caleb leaned on the post. Neither spoke for a while, and it was not an uncomfortable quiet. It was the other kind, the kind that's better than talk. "It's a good place you've got," Myra said finally. "It feels like something's mending here." "Reckon it is," Caleb said. He looked at her and she looked back, and the distance between them on that porch got very small and very large at the same time. He could have crossed it. He wanted to. He saw in her face that she'd not have stopped him. And then a floorboard creaked inside, some small night sound of the house, and they both stepped back at once, shy as two young things at a barn dance, and laughed a little at themselves, though nothing funny had been said. "I ought to get on," Myra said. "I'll bring the trap around," said Caleb. He walked her out. At the gate she paused, and for a moment it seemed she'd say the thing that neither of them was saying, but she only touched his sleeve, brief and warm, and said, "Thursday," and drove off into the dark. He watched the little lantern of the trap swing down the road until the night took it, and then he stood there a while longer, which had become a habit with him. It was Nell who said it out loud, of course. Children say the things the grown folks are too afraid to. It was a Sunday, the three of them at the table over the noon meal, Mara having stayed the weekend on account of rain making the roads a misery. Nell had been quiet, chewing, thinking in the visible way children think, and then she set down her fork and looked from one of them to the other. "Miss Myra," she said, "are you gonna be my ma?" The kitchen went very still. Caleb felt the question go through him like cold water. Across the table Myra's cheeks colored, and her eyes went bright and wet all at once, and she opened her mouth and found nothing in it. "I'm asking," Nell pressed, because no one had answered, and she was a girl who liked her answers. "'Cause I never had one I remember, and you'd be a good one, and Biscuit likes you, and—" She faltered, and her voice dropped, small and hopeful and afraid, "and I'd like it, is all." "Nell," Caleb started, and did not know how to finish, because the true answer was a thing he had not let himself want out loud. Myra reached across and took the girl's hand. "That's not a thing I decide all by myself, sweetheart," she said, gentle, her voice not quite steady. "But I'll tell you a body would be lucky. Any body would be lucky to be your ma." It was not yes and it was not no, but Nell seemed to hear something in it that satisfied her, and she went back to her dinner. Over her bent head Caleb and Mara looked at each other, and everything that had gone unsaid on the porch was there in the look, laid bare, hope, plain and terrifying on both their faces. The other thing happened in town the following week, and it showed Nell and the town a different piece of the man. They'd gone in for supplies, the three of them, and a cattle buyer named Hollies was on the boardwalk, a big loud man soured by drink though it was scarce past noon. Nell, running ahead as children do, cut across his path, and he seized her by the arm and shook her hard. "Watch where you're going, you little," and he said a word to her, an ugly one, a word no child should be handed, and shook her again so her teeth clicked. Caleb crossed the boardwalk before he decided to. He did not shout. That was the thing the town would speak of after, that he never raised his voice at all. He set one hand on Hollies' wrist, and without any hurry, opened the man's grip off the girl's arm and put himself between them and stood there and looked at Hollies from very close. "You don't speak to her," Caleb said. His voice was low and even, and there was nothing in it that could be argued with. "You don't touch her, not now, not ever. You understand me." Hollies was a bigger man, but he saw that here was the ground the quiet rancher would die on and had already decided as much. He mumbled something, backed off, and went away down the street, and the boardwalk let out a breath. Myra had gathered Nell against her skirts. The girl was crying now, not from the hurt so much as the fright, and Caleb knelt and looked her over, gentle as he'd been hard a moment before. "You're all right," he told her. "Nobody's ever going to hurt you while I'm standing. That's a promise, and I don't break those." She threw her arms around his neck and held on, and he held her there in the street and did not care who saw. That night home again, Nell asleep at last and the doll tucked in beside her, Caleb sat by the low fire with the miner's things spread on the table, the folded claim paper Amos had pressed on him, and the cheap tin locket. He'd meant to keep them safe for the girl and had near forgotten them in the living of the days. He turned the locket in his fingers and the little clasp gave, and it fell open, and there inside where he'd expected a picture was a folded scrap of paper, worn soft, dense with the crabbed hand of an assay office. He read it twice by the firelight, and understood little of it, only that it spoke of ore and figures and a word, silver, underlined hard enough to have near torn the page. He folded it back and closed the locket and set it away in the tin box on the high shelf, and thought no more of it than that a dead man had carried a bit of hope in his pocket, as dead men do. Then he banked the fire and looked in on the sleeping girl and went to bed in a house that no longer felt empty. Chapter 5, The Man with the Paper. The morning had the clean gold light Caleb liked best, the kind that lay long across the yard and made even the weathered rails of the corral look worth something. Nell was out by the barn with her lamb, coaxing it along on a length of twine and scolding it in a low, important voice, the way she'd once heard old Pate scold a mule. Mara had ridden out early, a basket of readers under the seat, and the schoolteacher's mare was cropping grass by the water trough as if she belonged there. Everything in the place had settled into a rhythm Caleb no longer questioned. He had stopped waiting for it to end. That was the trouble with a good morning. It made a man forget the road. He heard the buggy before he saw it, a light, well-sprung rattle that didn't belong to any wagon in the county. When it came around the bend, it was black and polished, drawn by a matched pair too fine for hauling, and the man on the seat drove with the loose, unhurried confidence of somebody who had never once in his life been in a hurry to arrive anywhere he wasn't wanted. Caleb set down the harness he'd been mending and walked to the middle of the yard, so the buggy would have to stop for him and not the other way around. The man drew rein and looked down, smiling. He was smooth-shaven and pale in a way that spoke of offices and hotel dining rooms, dressed in gray broadcloth without a speck of trail dust on it, though the roads out here were nothing but dust. His eyes moved once around the yard, the barn, the lamb, the little girl, and came back to Caleb, and the smile never wavered. "Good morning," he said. "A fine place. You'd be Caleb, I think." "I would. My name is Rourke." He climbed down without being asked, unfolding tall and easy, and produced a card from an inside pocket the way a card sharp produces the winning hand, slow, so you'd be sure to see it. "Land agent. I represent certain interested parties back east. May I trouble you for a few minutes of your time?" Caleb didn't take the card. "You can say your piece from where you're standing." "So I can." Rourke tucked the card away again, unbothered. He glanced toward the barn where Nell had gone still with the twine in her small fist, watching the stranger the way a rabbit watches a hawk pass over. "That would be the child, Nell, isn't it? Amos's girl." The name of the dead man in this man's clean mouth turned something cold in Caleb's belly. "You knew Amos." "Of him, only of him." Rourke folded his hands. "You'll want to hear this indoors, I think. It concerns the girl's future, and it isn't the kind of thing a man cares to have shouted across a yard." "She stays where I can see her." Caleb didn't move. "Say it here." Rourke inclined his head as if granting a small and foolish request. "As you like." He looked out past the corral to the blue hills, and when he spoke again his voice had the ease of a man laying out cards face up because he already knew he'd won the hand. "Amos was a miner. You knew that much. What you may not know is that the claim he abandoned when he took sick, a poor stony hole up in the Silver Creek district that half the territory had written off, has since been shown to sit atop a vein of ore. A rich one. Silver, Mr. Caleb, and a good deal of it. The kind of strike that makes newspapers and widows and lawsuits." Caleb said nothing. Behind him he heard Mara come to the porch step, drawn by the strange voice, and go quiet. "You begin to see," Rourke said gently. "A dead man's stake worth a fortune, and the law in its wisdom provides that an unworked claim may be entered upon and filed by another or held in trust for the lawful heir. The heir, in this case, being a child of 7. His pale gaze drifted again to Nell. "A child with no mother, no filed guardian of record, and no living kin that the county can find. Which means, sir, that whoever the court appoints to keep her keeps everything that is hers, including the vein." The morning light hadn't changed, but it felt colder on the back of Caleb's neck. "I keep her," Caleb said. "Her father asked it of me. I gave my word." "Your word?" Rourke said it kindly, the way a man says a child's name. "I don't doubt you gave it, I don't doubt you meant it, but a word, Mr. Caleb, is heir. It signs no register, it stands in no court. There is no paper in the county with your name beside hers, and I have looked." He let that settle. "I am not here to fight you. I would count that a waste of a decent man. I am here to offer you something better than a fight." "Say it then and get off my land." Rourke smiled as though the rudeness pleased him, as though it confirmed some private measurement he'd already taken. You sign the child over to proper care. There are institutions back east built for exactly this. Well-funded, respectable, better than anything a bachelor rancher and a hired hand can give a little girl, whatever the affection. The parties I represent will see her provided for handsomely, and they will see you provided for as well. A man could stock this range twice over with what I'm authorized to offer. You'd want for nothing. And the girl, he spread his hands, the girl would want for nothing either. Everyone walks away richer, and no one goes to war over a mine. From the porch, Caleb heard Myra draw a slow breath. He didn't turn. He kept his eyes on Rourke, and when he spoke his voice was as level as the horizon. No. Rourke waited, patient, as if the word might have more coming behind it. When nothing did, he tilted his head. You'll want to think it over. It's a great deal of money, and it isn't a decision a sensible man makes standing in his own yard before noon. I made it in the yard the day her father died, Caleb said. You can't buy a thing that isn't for sale. For the first time, something moved behind Rourke's eyes. Not anger, nothing so useful as anger, only a flicker of genuine interest, the way a card player looks up when the game turns out to be worth playing after all. He studied Caleb a moment longer. Then he reached into his coat and drew the card out again and set it deliberately on the top rail of the corral fence, where the wind would have to work to take it. Then let me be as plain as you've been, he said, and his voice never lost its courtesy, which was the worst of it. The affection does you credit. It will not save you. The county has a workhouse and a quota and a great deal of respect for a man who arrives with lawyers and documents in order. I have all three. You have a grave on a hill and a promise no clerk can read. He settled his hat. The girl belongs where the paper says she belongs, Mr. Caleb, and the paper does not say here. Not yet. Not without me. Get on your buggy. I'm going. Rourke climbed up, gathered the reins, and looked down one last time, and the smile he gave then was almost gentle, almost sorry, which Caleb would remember for a long while after. Think of the child's future, he said, since you're so fond of her. There's a hearing coming, whether you attend it or not. I'd advise you to attend. He clucked to the matched pair, and the black buggy came around in a smooth arc and went back down the road the way it had come, unhurried to the last, the dust rising gold behind it and hanging in the still air a long time before it settled. Nobody moved until it was gone. Then Nell came across the yard at a run, dropping the twine, the lamb bawling forgotten behind her, and she didn't stop until she'd fetched up hard against Caleb's leg with both arms around it, her face turned away from the road. He put his hand down on her head without thinking, the way he'd learned to over these weeks, and felt her shaking. Is that man gonna take me? She said into his trousers, muffled and fierce and small. That man. Is he? Caleb went down on his heel so his eyes were level with hers. She had Amos's stubborn chin and her own frightened eyes, and he made himself hold both. No, he said. You promise. The word sat between them like a live coal. He had promised her father over a wet claim paper and a tin locket that she'd be kept safe. He'd promised it easy, the way a man promises a dying stranger because it had cost him nothing yet. It was going to cost him now. He found he didn't care. I promise, Caleb said. You hear me, Nell? Nobody takes you. Not for money, not for silver, not for any paper a man can carry. You're staying right here. She searched his face the way children do, without mercy, looking for the crack. She didn't find one. After a moment she nodded once, and let go of his leg enough to breathe, and went back to gather up her lamb, and the ordinary world tried to close over the morning again. It didn't quite. Caleb straightened and found Mara beside him. She had come down off the porch without his hearing it, and she stood with her arms folded against the chill that wasn't in the air, watching the empty road. He'll do it, she said quietly. Everything he said. He wasn't bluffing, Caleb. A man doesn't drive a rig like that out here to bluff a rancher. I know it. Lawyers, documents, a quota. She shook her head slowly. The sheriff's a good man, but Dahl keeps the law as it's written, not as it ought to be, and it's written down for men like that. It always has been. Caleb walked to the corral rail and looked at the card lying there, cream-colored and clean, ROURKE printed on it in a hard black type with a firm's name beneath it, and an address back east that meant money and time and everything he did not have. He did not pick it up. He put 2 fingers on it and turned it over, and the back was blank, which somehow said more than the front. I gave my word, he said. It came out lower than he meant it to. "I know you did." Mara's voice softened. She laid her hand over his on the rail, and her touch was warm and steadying, and it was the only warm thing in the whole cold morning. "But your word was enough for you and Amos. It was enough for God, maybe. I don't know that it's enough for the county of Silver Creek." Out by the barn, Nell had started singing to her lamb again, tuneless and small, a sound that a week ago would have loosened something in his chest. Now it only tightened it. He looked at the little girl in the long gold light, at the twine and the twig-legged lamb and the whole fragile ordinary life the three of them had built without meaning to. And for the first time since he had knelt in the mud and said the words to a dying man, Caleb was afraid. He had never in his life broken his word. He was no longer certain, standing in his own yard with the dust settling on the road, that keeping it would be up to him. Chapter 6. What the Law Allows. The road to town was hard and pale under a sky the color of old tin, and Caleb drove the wagon without saying much of anything, which was his way. Mara sat beside him with her gloved hands folded in her lap and her back straight as a schoolhouse ruler, and she did not fill the silence either, because she had learned in these last weeks that his quiet was not emptiness. It was a man thinking. It was a man who did not spend a word he had not first weighed. "He filed something," Caleb said at last, when the church steeple came up over the rise. "I feel it in my teeth. A man like that doesn't leave a card and ride off unless he's already ahead of you." "Then we get ahead of him," Mara said. "We make it plain and legal that Nell belongs where she is. Sheriff Dahl is a fair man." "Fair," Caleb said, "isn't the same as free to help." She looked at him then at the set of his jaw and the way his knuckles stood white on the reins, and she wished she could tell him he was wrong. She had a bad feeling she couldn't. The sheriff's office smelled of coffee and gun oil and the wood smoke off a stove that never quite caught. Sheriff Dahl rose when they came in, and he did not smile, and that was the first thing Caleb noticed, because Dahl always smiled, even at men he was about to arrest. "Caleb," Dahl said, "Ms. Mara, sit if you'd care to." "We'll stand," Caleb said. "We came to make Nell mine on paper, guardianship proper and filed. Tell me what you need from me, and I'll sign it." Dahl drew a long breath through his nose and set both hands flat on the desk, as though he meant to hold it down. "I wish to God you'd come in a week ago." "Say it plain." "Rourke's already filed." Dahl pushed a folded document across the desk, and Caleb did not touch it, only looked. "Petition for guardianship of the minor child Nell, daughter of the late Amos, come before the county court. Filed with lawyers out of the territorial capital. And he's produced papers, Caleb. A note of debt says Amos owed him better than $400 against the mining stake, signed and witnessed. A letter naming a cousin of the dead man, Rourke's client, he says as nearest living kin. He's put money in the bank here under a bond for the child's keeping. On paper, the man looks like Christian charity in a good coat." Mara had picked up the petition. Her eyes went down the lines of it fast, the way she read a child's slate. "This debt note is dated the spring before Amos died, and this witness, I don't know the name." "Neither do I," Dahl said. "But I can't unknow it just because it's inconvenient. That's the trouble with paper, ma'am. It doesn't have to be true. It only has to be filed." Caleb's voice came low and even. "Amos gave me his word and his hand and his daughter with his last breath. He gave me the claim paper folded in my own palm. That's not nothing." "It's not nothing to me," Dahl said, and he meant it. Caleb could see he meant it. "But a dying man's word with no witness but you, against a stack of signed documents and a bond posted at the bank. Caleb, I'm the law in this county, not the judge over it. If it comes to the court, and it will, the court weighs what it can hold in its hand. And right now Rourke's hand is fuller than yours." The stove ticked. Outside, a dog barked at nothing and gave it up. "What makes mine fuller?" Caleb said. It was not quite a question. Dahl rubbed the back of his neck. "A stable home, standing in the county, church folk who'll speak for you, a wife." He said the last word carefully and did not look at Mara when he said it. "A judge looks at a hard-handed bachelor rancher who buries his own on a hill and talks to nobody, and then he looks at a well-dressed man with a bank bond and a lawyer. And I'll tell you which one reads as a fit home to a man who's never met either of them. It ain't right. It's just how it reads." Caleb said nothing. The muscle in his jaw worked. It was Mara who spoke, and she spoke clearly, the way she called a room of children to their letters. "Then it should read otherwise. A married household. A mother in the home and a schoolteacher at that. The county knows me, Sheriff. It's known me longer than it's known its own courthouse. If Caleb and I stand before the court as husband and wife, with Nell between us, no judge in the territory could call that anything but a fit home." The words landed in the little office and hung there. Dahl looked at his desk. Caleb looked at Myra, and for once his face was not a shut door. Something moved behind it, quick and startled and unguarded, gone almost before she caught it. "Myra," he said, and stopped. "I know what I said," she answered, and her chin came up, though color had climbed into her cheeks. "I said it because it's true, and because it works, and because I would rather say it in front of the sheriff where it's only sense than say it out on that porch where it might be something I'm afraid of. There. Now it's said." Dahl had the decency to become suddenly and deeply interested in a paper on the far side of his desk. Caleb took his hat off, which he had not done coming in, and turned it once in his hands. "I won't have you doing a thing like that for strategy," he said quietly. "You're worth more than a card played against a man like Rourke." "Who said it was only strategy?" she said, softer now. He looked at her a long moment. Then he set his hat back on and turned to the sheriff, and his voice had gone flat and hard again, but it was the hardness of a man who has just been handed something and does not intend to drop it. "When's the court sit?" "Judge comes through on the 21st, Dahl said. 2 weeks Tuesday, he'll hear the petitions together." He hesitated. "Get your papers in, Caleb. Get the marriage on record if that's the road. Get every soul in this town who'll stand for you ready to stand. And bring anything you've got that's Amos's own hand. Anything at all. The court weighs what it can hold." They did not talk about it on the road home, and that was its own kind of talking. Myra sat closer to him than she had that morning, and neither of them remarked on it, and the wagon rocked and the tin sky went gray-gold at its western edge, and the thing between them sat quiet and enormous and unnamed. It was Nell who broke the peace, though she did not mean to, and neither of them knew it yet. She had been on the porch step waiting, as she always was now, with the lamb old Pate had let her keep budding at her elbow. But she was not smiling when the wagon came up the track, and she did not run to it. She sat very still, the way she had sat still in the wagon bed that first terrible day, and Caleb felt something cold turn over in his chest at the sight of her. "Nell," he said, swinging down. "Girl, what is it?" "Nothing," she said, which was a child's word for everything. Myra knelt in front of her, careful, the way she'd taught Caleb to be careful. "Did somebody come while we were gone?" The lamb bawled. Nell's arm tightened around it. Later, much later, when he pieced it together, Caleb would learn that a stranger on a good horse had ridden up the road just far enough to be seen, sat looking at the house a while, and then turned back. And old Pate, thinking a child hears nothing, had come in muttering about Rourke's men and lawyers and the girl being took to the county if the court went wrong. And Nell had been on the stair, and Nell had heard the 2 words that mattered, sent away. She did not tell them this. What she said was, "Are they gonna make me go?" Myra's breath caught. "No," she said. "No, sweetheart, listen to me." "'Cause I heard," Nell said, and her voice was thin and grown-up and terrible in a way no child's voice should be. "I heard it's on account of the money, the mine, that there's a man wants me for the mine and the law might say so. And if I wasn't here, there wouldn't be no trouble for you." She looked at Caleb, and her chin was doing the thing Myra's had done in the sheriff's office, holding itself up by main force. "I don't want to be trouble." Caleb went down on one knee in the dust so his eyes were level with hers. He did not reach for her, he had learned that too, but he did not look away either. "You listen to me," he said. "You are not trouble, you are the reason I get up in the dark. There is a man who thinks a piece of paper can carry you off from this house. He is wrong. He does not know yet how wrong he is." He said it slow and plain and without 1 ounce of the pretty comfort adults used on children, and Nell believed him the way a child believes a stone is hard. "Nobody takes you, not him. Not the county, not the law itself. You hear me?" She looked at him a long time. Then she nodded once and let go of the lamb and put both her thin arms around his neck, and Caleb held very still, as though a wild bird had lit on him, and closed his eyes. Over the top of her head he found Myra's face, wet-eyed and fierce, and he spoke to her though the words were for all 3 of them. "Whatever it takes," he said quietly. "You understand me, whatever it takes, she's not leaving my house." "I know," Myra said. "I'm not either." And that was how it was decided. Not on a porch under stars the way she'd been half afraid of and half wishing for. but in the dust of the yard with a child between them and a lamb complaining, and the light going down gold behind the barn. That night when the house was dark and the two of them thought her asleep, Nell lay awake in her bed with the doll her father had made her clutch to her chest, and she listened to the low murmur of the grown-ups' voices below, the words she couldn't make out but the fear she could, and she was not comforted. She loved them too much to be comforted, and love, in a frightened child, does strange arithmetic. She got up without a sound. She took her spare dress from the peg, and a heel of bread from the crock, and the tin cup that had been her father's, and she tied them into a small bundle in her second-best apron and pushed it far back under the bed where no grown-up would think to look. And then she lay back down and stared at the dark ceiling and did not cry, because she had promised her father once she wouldn't, on the worst day, and Nell kept her promises. She was, after all, being raised by a man who kept his. Out on the ranch road, past the gate, where the moon threw the fence posts down in long black bars across the pale dust, a horseman sat unhurried in the dark and watched the one-lit window of the house go out. After a while he turned his horse and rode easy back toward town, in no hurry at all, the way a man rides when he believes the law is already on his side. Chapter 7, The Wedding and the Warning. The morning of the wedding, Caleb rose before the sun the way he always had, and for the first time in longer than he could name, the quiet of the house did not feel like something waiting to swallow him. He stood at the window in his one clean shirt, the collar buttoned wrong twice before he got it right, and looked down the hill to where the little grave stood under its lean cottonwood. There were 3 markers there now, weathered smooth by seasons, a wife, an infant, and the miner Amos, who had died in the front room with his daughter's name on his lips. Caleb touched the window glass with 2 fingers, as though he could reach them all through it. "I'm keeping my word," he said low to no one who could answer. "Every part of it." Behind him, Nell's small bare feet slapped the floorboards. She came to his elbow in the yellow dress Myra had sewn from a bolt of calico, her hair braided crooked because Caleb had done it, and she looked up at him with her father's dark, solemn eyes. "Do I hold the flowers the whole time?" she asked. "The whole time," Caleb said. "Reckon you're the most important part." "More than you. More than me by a long way." She considered that, and the corner of her mouth twitched, not a smile yet, but the country a smile came from. She slipped her hand into his without being asked, and Caleb stood very still the way a man stands when a wild thing lights on his arm, and he does not want to frighten it off. They married at noon on the porch of the little house, because Mara had said she would not be wed inside 4 courthouse walls with Sheriff Dahl's spittoon in the corner, and Caleb had found he would have married her at the bottom of a well if she'd asked it. The circuit preacher came out on his gray mule. Old Pate stood up as witness in a coat that had last seen daylight at a funeral, his gray whiskers combed flat, blinking hard and pretending it was the dust. Mara came out of the door in a plain gray dress with a sprig of wild aster pinned at her throat, and Caleb forgot every word he had ever rehearsed. She was not a girl and made no pretense of being one. There was silver already threading her dark hair and a widow's steadiness in the set of her shoulders. That was the thing that undid him. She had known loss the way he had, and she had chosen to stand on his porch anyway. "You look struck stupid," she murmured as she reached him. "I am," he said. "Good, keep it that way, and we'll get along fine." Pate barked a laugh and turned it into a cough. "The preacher spoke his piece." Nell held the flowers in both fists so tight the stems bruised, and when the preacher asked who blessed this union, she said, "I do," before anyone had thought to ask her, loud and certain, and the whole small gathering laughed, and then Nell laughed too, surprised at herself, a bright, ragged sound that Caleb realized he had never once heard from her. It went into him like water into cracked ground. When the preacher said the words that made it done, Caleb bent and kissed his wife, brief and careful in front of the child and the hired man and God, and Mara's hand came up flat against his chest, not to push but to feel his heart going. "There," she said, unsteady. "Now the paper says what's already true." That evening, when the preacher had ridden off and Pate had gone contented to the bunkhouse, the 3 of them sat on the porch step in the blue dusk. Nell fell asleep against Mara's side with the ruined flowers still in her lap, and Caleb reached across the child to take his wife's hand. "I didn't marry you for the guardianship papers," he said. He was not a man who said such things, and the saying cost him. "I want you to know that. If Rourke and his lawyers never came, I'd still have found my way to asking. Slower, maybe, but I'd have got there." Myra looked at him a long moment in the failing light. "I know it," she said. "I married you the same." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and above the sleeping girl she whispered, "This is mine now, all of it. Don't you let anybody take it." "Nobody takes what's mine," Caleb said, so quiet it was almost only breath. "Not while I stand up." He believed it. He would have cause, before the night was through, to learn how thin belief could wear. It was the smell that woke him, not smoke at first, but the wrongness of it in a house that had been swept and settled for sleep. Then the horses screaming in the barn, and the red light jumping on the ceiling like something alive. Myra, he had his boots on before he was fully awake. The barn, keep Nell in the house, bolt the door. He went out into a night gone orange. The near end of the barn was already a wall of fire, and the flames stood up straight and hungry in a wind that had no business blowing that direction. Somebody had wanted them to blow. Down along the south fence, Caleb saw, in the leaping light, the black shape of a rider sitting his horse easy, watching the work he'd done, and then wheeling and gone before Caleb could do more than mark him. Old Pate was already there, an old man in his union suit throwing open stall doors, hauling the crazed horses out by their halters into the dark. Caleb threw his weight beside him. They got the bay, the two plow horses, Nell's spotted pony that squealed and fought them. The heat came off the timbers like a fist. "The last stall," Pate shouted. "The lamb's penned back of it. Nell's pet lamb." Caleb was already moving. He heard Pate coming behind him against all sense, and then he heard the crack overhead, the long, groaning tear of a roof beam giving way. He got the lamb. He turned. The beam came down in a shower of sparks, and Pate shoved him clear of it and did not get clear himself. It caught the old man across the shoulder and dropped him. Caleb hauled him out by the collar with the lamb bawling under one arm, both of them into the cold, clean air, and beat the sparks out of Pate's whiskers with his bare hand, while the barn roared behind them and folded in on itself. They saved nothing but the animals and the old man barely. By the time the last wall fell, they were only 3 exhausted people standing in the wet ashlight of dawn, and a 4th laid out on the porch with his arm bound, and his face gray with pain and stubborn as a fence post. "Quit fussin'," Pate rasped when Myra knelt over him. "Shoulders bruised, not broke, seen worse fallen off a mule." "You went back in," Caleb said. It was as close to a fury as his voice ever came. "You old fool for a lamb." "Went back in for you, Yidget," Pate said, and shut his eyes and let Mara tend him. Caleb stood in his own yard and looked at the ruin of the barn and the cut ends of his south fence wire and the empty range where 50 head of cattle had been driven off into the dark, and he understood he was meant to look at all of it. It was a letter written in fire, and it was signed. "Fold before court," it said. "Fold, or there is more of this, and next time it will not be a lamb and it will not be a bruise." He became aware of Nell in the doorway. She had not stayed bolted inside. She stood on the sill in her nightdress with her doll hanging forgotten from one hand, and she was looking at the black bones of the barn and the blood on Pate's shirt, and her small face had gone to something worse than crying. She had the still, sick look of a child doing arithmetic she was too young to be doing. "It's because of me," she said. Caleb crossed the yard fast and went down on one knee in front of her. "No. The bad man wants me, Papa's paper, that's why." Her chin shook and held. "Pate got hurt because of me. The barn, the horses, if I go with him it'll stop. I heard the man in town say I belong where the paper says. I could just—" "Nell," he took her by both shoulders, gentle and immovable. "Look at me. Not one thing that happened tonight is yours to carry, not one. A wicked man did wicked work. That's his to answer for, and he will answer for it. Not you. You hear me? You are not a thing that gets a family hurt. You're the reason there's a family at all." She looked at him with her father's eyes swimming, and she did not quite believe him, and he saw that she did not, and it frightened him more than the fire had. The court sat 3 days later. Caleb had scrubbed the ash from under his nails and put on the wedding shirt again, and Mara sat beside him straight-backed, and they had left Nell with a neighbor woman because no child should hear men in a paneled room deciding who she was. It went wrong from the first gavel. Rourke came in silk and calm, his lawyer stacking documents on the table like a man laying brick, a creditor's note against Amos's estate, a deposition of distant kinship, an affidavit from the land office, every paper crisp and stamped and false, and every one of them heavier in that room than a plain man's plain word. Caleb told the truth. He told how Amos had died and what Amos had asked and what he had promised. He told it clean, and it was true, and he watched it weigh nothing at all against the pile of paper on the other table. The judge was not a cruel man. He was a tired one and a careful one, and he peered over his spectacles at Caleb for a long moment with something almost like regret. "Mr. Caleb, this court does not doubt your character, but guardianship of a minor holding property of value cannot rest on a deathbed conversation to which there is no witness living. Mr. Rourke has presented documentary claim, and the child's interest, her financial interest, must be secured by law, not by sentiment." He set his hands flat on the bench. "Pending review of these filings, this court is inclined to place the minor and her estate under Mr. Rourke's appointed care." The word inclined was a small mercy, and it did not feel like one. Caleb sat very still. Across the room Rourke did not smile, he was too clever to smile, but he inclined his own polished head a fraction toward Caleb, the way a man tips his hat to a job well finished. Mara's hand found Caleb's under the table and gripped it hard enough to hurt, and he was glad of the hurt, because it was the only thing in that room that felt true. He had given his word over a dying man. He had married and vowed and stood between the child and every rough word in the county. He had pulled a lamb from the fire and his oldest friend out from under a falling roof. And a stack of clean lies on a stranger's table had, in the space of one gray morning, come very near to taking her anyway. "Not while I stand up," he had whispered on the porch. He stood up now in the courtroom, hat in his two hands, and he did not shout and he did not beg. He looked at the judge and he looked at Rourke, and something in his flat, quiet gaze made the land agent's easy face go, for just a moment, uncertain. "There's a paper you haven't seen," Caleb said. Chapter 8, The Empty Bed. The ruling came home with them like a third rider, silent and heavy, and it would not dismount. Caleb had not spoken the whole way back from the courthouse. He had held the reins loose and let the team find their own road while the judge's words turned over and over behind his eyes. Pending review, the child to remain available to the county's disposition. He had built his whole life on the idea that a man's word was a thing you could stand on, a floor beneath your boots that would not give. Today, a fat sheaf of Rourke's papers had gone through that floor like it was river ice, and Caleb had watched himself fall and had not known how to stop it. Myra sat close against him on the seat, her shoulder pressed to his arm, saying nothing because there was nothing left that talking could mend. In the wagon bed behind them, Nell lay curled in a blanket, small and still, her doll clutched to her chest. She had not cried in the courtroom. She had only gone very white and very quiet, the way she had been that first night in his house, and that quiet frightened Caleb more than any weeping could have. Old Pate met them at the gate, one arm still bound from the fire, his face folding when he read the answer in the set of Caleb's shoulders. He did not ask. He took the team and led them off toward the barn, murmuring low to the horses, and left the family to walk up to a house that had never felt so much like a place waiting to be emptied. They ate almost nothing. Mara warmed a pan of beans and cut bread, and the three of them sat under the lamp and moved food around their plates. Nell would not look up. "It ain't decided," Caleb said at last, because the silence had grown teeth. His voice came out rough and low. "You hear me, Nell? Nothing's decided. That paper says review. Review means it can go the other way. We got fight left." Nell lifted her eyes to him then, and they were older than 7 years had any right to make them. "He's got more paper," she said. "You said your word was the best thing you had, and it wasn't enough." The words went into him clean, the way a splinter of glass goes in no pain at first, then all of it. He opened his mouth and found he had nothing to set against her, because she was right, and a lie now would be worse than the wound. Myra reached across and covered the girl's small hand with her own. "Nell, look at me. Grown people made a mistake today. That's all it is, a mistake, and mistakes get set right. You did nothing wrong, nothing. Do you understand me?" Nell nodded, but it was the nod children give to make the grown one stop, and Caleb saw it and could not fix it and hated that he could not. They put her to bed early. Caleb stood in the doorway of the little room he had made for her out of what had once been a storeroom, the shelf he had planed smooth for her stones and feathers, the peg where her second dress hung, the window he had glazed himself so she could see the hill. She lay with the doll against her cheek and her eyes open in the dark. "Good night," he said. It felt too small a word. "Good night," she answered. He wanted to cross the room and gather her up, and tell her that no county on God's earth would ever take her out of this house while breath was in him. But he had said things like that already, and the day had shown them both how little a saying weighed. So he only stood there a moment more, and then he pulled the door most of the way closed, the way she liked it, and went to sit by the stove with Myra until the fire burned low. The wind came up around midnight. It came down off the high country the way it did before the cold rains, rattling the shutters, worrying at the eaves, and Caleb woke from a thin sleep in his chair with his neck stiff and Myra asleep against his shoulder, and some wrongness prickling along his arms before his mind had named it. He sat still and listened. The house spoke its ordinary night sounds, the tick of the cooling stove, the settle of timber, the wind. But under them was a wrongness, an absence, a hollow place where a sound should have been and was not. He could not hear the child breathing. He was up before he had decided to be, crossing the room in 3 strides, pushing the door. The bed was empty, the blanket thrown back and cold, the window unlatched and swinging on the wind and the cold pouring in through it, and on the pillow, laid out careful and deliberate, the rag doll with its stitched smile turned up at the black ceiling. Nell never left the doll. Not once, not since the wagon, not through the burying, nor the fire, nor any bad night between. The doll on the pillow was not a thing forgotten. It was a thing left behind on purpose, the way a person leaves what they mean never to need again. Myra, his voice did not sound like his own. Myra, she's gone. Then the house came alive all at once, Myra up and calling the girl's name. The lamp flaring, Caleb dragging on his coat and boots, out into the yard where the wind snatched his shout and threw it away. He found the sign at the base of the window. Small boot prints in the churned mud, headed not toward the barn where she'd run in the old days, but out past the corral, toward the open road that ran down the valley toward town, and beyond it toward the mountains and the abandoned diggings her father had died leaving behind. She was trying to fix it. The understanding hit him like a fist. She had heard them, all of it, the review, the papers, the trouble, and she had decided in her small, fierce heart that she was the cause of it, that if she took herself out of the house, the fire and the ruin and the fear would stop, that she could give herself back and make them safe. She was 7 years old, and she was walking into the dark to save them. Pate, Caleb was already running for the barn. Pate, saddle up, the girls run, she's on the road, she's gone up the valley. Old Pate came out of the dark half-dressed and did not waste a breath on questions. Myra was behind Caleb with a lantern and her shawl and her jaw set hard as struck flint. "I'm coming," she said, and it was not a thing to argue with, so he did not. The first fat drops of rain came slanting down as they got the horses out. Cold rain, mountain rain, the kind that could kill a grown man caught out in it without shelter, let alone a child in a nightdress and thin boots. And there was worse than the rain. Caleb thought of Rourke's men, who had been watching the ranch road for a week now, sitting their horses in the tree line at all hours. If they were out tonight, if they came upon a lone child on the road, the very child their master meant to seize, they would not need papers to take her. They would only need to reach down. The thought nearly unmanned him. He stood a moment in the driving rain with the reins in his fist and felt the whole weight of the day and the night come down on him at once, and it was more than a man could hold. He had given his word to a dying man to keep this child safe, and he had failed her in a courtroom, and now she was somewhere out in the black and the cold because she believed she was worth less to them than their peace. Every promise he had ever made felt like a lie he had told himself. He was no one's father. He never had been. A man could not keep what the world was determined to take. He did not remember deciding to go up the hill. His legs took him. Past the house, up the wet slope in the dark, to the little fenced ground where 3 stones stood, his wife, his infant son, and the newest, roughest one, Amos the miner who had trusted him with the only thing he had left in the world. Caleb went down on his knees in the mud before it. The rain ran off his hat brim and down his collar, and he did not feel it. "I gave you my word," he said out loud to the stone, to the man under it, to the dark. His voice broke and he let it. "I told you I'd keep her. I told you I don't break my word, not ever, and tonight I'm on my knees in front of you because I near did." He dragged a breath that hurt. "I don't care what their paper says. I don't care what the judge signs or how deep that vein runs. She's mine to keep because I said so to a dying man, and that's the oldest law there is, older than any county. So you hear me, Amos? I'm going to go get your girl. I'm going to bring her home. And there's no man walking and no God in his heaven going to stop me doing it." He got up. The grief was still in him, but it had changed its shape. It had gone from the thing that pressed him into the ground to the thing that lifted him up off it. He came down the hill fast, and Mara was there at the bottom holding both horses, her hair plastered to her face, the lantern hissing in the rain. "Well," she said. "We find her," Caleb said. "Tonight, we don't stop and we don't quit and we don't come back without her." "No," Mara agreed fiercely, "we do not." She caught his sleeve, and in the lantern light her eyes were wet with more than rain, but there was no give in them anywhere. "She thinks she's saving us, Caleb. She thinks she's a burden we'd be lighter without. When we find her, and we will find her, she has to know, not just be told. No." "She will," he said. "I'll spend the rest of my life making her know it if that's what it takes." Pate came up leading his own mount, the lantern swinging, throwing wild loops of light across the streaming yard. "Road forks past the creek," he called over the wind. "One way to town, one way up to the old workings. Girls got a head start, but them legs is short." "You take the town road," Caleb told him. "Rouse the sheriff on your way, tell Dahl there's a child lost in this and Rourke's men are like as not on the roads. Mara and I take the mountain way. She'll have gone toward her pa's claim. It's the only place she thinks she can put things right." They mounted. The rain came harder, drumming the earth to mud, swallowing the lamplight 10 feet out. Somewhere ahead in all that black cold was a small girl with a stubborn heart, walking toward the ruin of everything to try to save the two people she loved, not knowing she was the whole of what they had. Caleb lifted the lantern high, and its little circle of gold pushed a few feet into the dark, and he rode into it. Behind him, Mara called the child's name into the storm, again and again, her voice raw and unbroken. And the night took their small light and did not give it back, but they went on into it anyway, side by side, because there was nothing left in either of them that knew how to turn around. Ahead, the road climbed into darkness, and they climbed after it. Chapter 9, The Whispered Claim. The rain had teeth. Caleb rode into it low over the gelding's neck, the lantern swinging from his fist, throwing a small wet circle of gold that the dark swallowed as fast as he could make it. Behind him, somewhere on the ridge trail, Mara's voice rose thin and ragged, calling Nell's name into a wind that tore it to pieces before it could travel. He did not call out. He had learned in the 2 hours since he'd found the empty bed and the doll lying face up on the pillow like a small drowned thing that the wind ate every sound he made. So he tracked instead. He read the mud. A child's boot print half filled with water. Then another pointed toward the old mine road, toward the river crossing. His blood went cold in a way the rain could not account for. "Smart girl," he said low to no one. "Wrong direction." She'd gone to fix it. He knew that the way he knew the weather. She'd heard the word workhouse and the word taken, and in her 7-year-old arithmetic she had reasoned that if she simply removed herself, the trouble would go with her, and Caleb and Mara would be safe. She meant to walk back to the only place she'd ever belonged before this, the dead stake, her father's claim, as if a mine could keep her the way a man had promised to. She did not know that other men waited on that road, but Caleb did. He put his heels to the gelding. The mine came up out of the storm like a broken tooth, the black mouth of it yawning above the river, and there, God help him, was the small, pale shape of her, standing at the crossing where the water ran fast and brown and swollen a foot over the stones. And between her and Caleb, strung along the near bank with their coats streaming and their horses stamping, were 4 men, Rourke's men. And Rourke himself at the center of them, dry beneath an oilskin, holding a lantern of his own and a leather folder pressed to his chest like scripture. "There now," Rourke called, pleasant pitch to carry. "The good rancher, I did wonder if you'd come." Caleb came off the horse before it had fully stopped. His feet found the mud and held. He did not go for the rifle in the scabbard. He'd left it deliberate, a decision made somewhere back on the ridge, because a man who rides into 4 guns to fetch, a child does not fetch her by making it a shooting matter over her head. He walked forward into the lantern light with his empty hands open at his sides and the rain sheeting off the brim of his hat. "Nell," he said, not loud, just enough. The small shape turned. Even at that distance, over the roar of the river, he saw her whole body change, the way a fence post changes when the wire finally pulls it true. "Caleb!" she cried and started toward him, and one of Rourke's men stepped sideways to cut her off. "Careful," Caleb said. He did not raise his voice for it. But something in the flat of the word stopped the man mid-step, one boot lifted, like a dog that has heard its master's tone in a stranger's mouth. Rourke smiled and lifted the folder. You'll want to hear me before you do anything a court would frown on. I have here a lawful order, signed, sealed. The child is a ward of contested estate, and pending the judge's review she is to be held in proper custody, mine. That's not my opinion, Mr. Caleb, that's the paper. He let the words sit in the rain. You put such stock in words. Here's one written down. It beats yours. Nell, Caleb said again, and this time it was to her, only to her, and he crouched down low in the mud so that his eyes came level with hers across the whole distance of men and rain. Come here to me. She looked at the man blocking her. She looked at Rourke. She looked at the river at her back, which she had meant to be her answer to all of it, and Caleb watched her understand in the terrible fast way of frightened children that she had run out of road. It's my fault, she said, and her voice broke on it. I heard 'em say it. They're gonna take me, and then there'll be more fires, and Pate got hurt, and it's 'cause of me, and if I go with him, then you and Mara can. No, he said it like a door closing. You listen to me now. The river roared. Rourke's man shifted. Up on the ridge behind, a second lantern was descending, Mara, coming down through the scrub with her skirts black to the knee. That's enough of this, Rourke said and nodded, and the nearest man reached for the child. What happened then happened fast, and Caleb would never afterward be able to tell it in order. He came up out of his crouch like something released. He was across the space before the man's hand closed, and he took the reaching arm and used the man's own weight and the treacherous mud together, and the man went down hard on his back in the shallows with the wind knocked white out of him. The second man clawed for his pistol. Caleb was inside it, close, too close for the gun to matter, and drove an elbow that folded him. He heard shouting. He heard Mara scream Nell's name. He got a fist in his collar and swung a man off him into the bank. His hat was gone. The rain was in his eyes. And then a gun did go off, flat and enormous, cracking across the water, and everyone froze. But it had not been fired at anyone. It had been fired at the sky. Hold, roared a new voice, and out of the dark up the mine road came riders, 3 of them, oilskins flapping, and at their head, rising in his stirrups with his pistol still smoking straight up into the rain, Sheriff Dahl. The next man that touches that child answers to me for it. Rourke, you tell your dogs to lie down. For one long breath nobody moved. Then Nell ran. She came off the crossing stones and past the man still gasping in the shallows and straight across the mud, and Caleb went down on both knees in it to take her, and she hit his chest so hard it drove the breath out of him, and he did not care. He got his arms all the way around her. She was cold as river water and shaking like a struck wire, and she smelled of rain and fear, and underneath of the soap Myra washed her hair with, and Caleb pressed his mouth down into the wet crown of her head and held on. I've got you, he said into her hair, low, so low it was almost nothing, almost only breath, meant for no ears but hers. I've got you, you hear me, you're mine. She sobbed and shook her head against him. It's my fault, it's my fault. And he took her small face in one big scarred hand and tipped it up so she had to look at him, rain running off both of them, and he said it again, and this time he did not whisper it small. He whispered it the way a man swears a thing before God, quiet and absolute, the quiet of a struck bell. You listen to me, you're mine. You've always been mine from the night your daddy put your hand in mine and I gave my word, and no paper, no man, no God above takes what's mine. I claim you. His voice did not shake. The whole world shook and his voice did not. I claim you and I claim her, and there was Mara arriving, dropping to her knees in the mud beside them, her arms coming around them both. For as long as I breathe and after, nobody's taking you anywhere, not tonight, not ever. You're home. Nell's whole small body broke open against him, and she wept, and Mara pressed her face to Caleb's shoulder, and the 3 of them knelt in the mud and the rain and the lantern light, and held on to each other while the men who had come to break them stood dripping and beaten in a ring around a thing they finally understood they could not touch. Rourke understood at last. This is theater, he said, but the pleasantness had gone out of him. He shook the folder. Sheriff, that man just assaulted 4 men in the commission of a lawful order. I have documents. You have documents, Dahl agreed heavily, swinging down off his horse. Funny thing about that. He walked forward, and Caleb, still on his knees with the child in his arms, lifted his head. From inside his sodden coat, one-handed, he drew out the thing he had carried against his heart since the night at the gate, the cheap tin locket, and folded inside it, dry, wrapped in oilcloth, the miner's real claim paper and the assay note that had lived in it all along. Amos filed his stake, Caleb said, Legal, registered at the land office, dated before ever he broke down at my fence. It's all here in his own hand, the claim, and a line leaving the girl and everything that's hers to my keeping if he died on the road. He held it out to Doll, but his eyes stayed on Rourke. Which he did, in my house, with her watching. Doll took it, turned it to the lantern, read. The date on your petition, Rourke, the sheriff said slowly, says this claim was abandoned and unfiled. This here says otherwise, in the register's own stamp, 3 weeks before your paper was ever drawn. He looked up. That makes your documents forged, and forgery to steal a child's inheritance is a hanging conversation in this county. The color left Rourke's face the way it had left his voice. Boys, Doll said to his deputies, take him. Rourke went for the folder, to burn it, to eat it. Caleb never knew. And the deputies had him by both arms before he'd taken a step. And the leather fell open into the mud. And the false papers he'd built his empire on soaked through and ran and turned to nothing in the rain. Caleb did not watch him taken. He had stopped caring about Rourke somewhere in the last minute, the way a man stops caring about the weather once he's under his own roof. He knelt in the ruin of the crossing with his daughter clutched to his chest and his wife's arms around them both, and he held on, and he did not let go. The storm began, very slowly, to spend itself. By the time they got Nell up onto Caleb's saddle, wrapped in Doll's dry coat and Mara's arms both, the rain had thinned to a mist, and there was a gray line breaking low in the east over the ridge. Caleb walked beside the gelding with a hand on the child's knee the whole way, not because she might fall, but because he could not make himself stop touching her, as if some part of him still needed the proof. Pa, Nell said once, half asleep against Myra, and stopped, startled at herself, the words slipping out ahead of her. Caleb's throat closed, he kept walking. He kept his hand on her knee. I'm here, he said. And as the dark went thin, and the first true light came up gold over the wet grass of his own country, the three of them came home the way they had gone out into the storm, together. And nothing in this world or the paper of it would ever put them asunder again. Chapter 10, Belonging. Spring came up the valley the way forgiveness comes to a hard man, slow, and then all at once, and then like it had always meant to. Caleb stood at the top of the hill with his hat in his hands and looked down at the ranch he had lived in alone for so many years, and it did not look like the same place. There was smoke rising straight and thin from the chimney. There was a lamb grown now into a foolish half-grown sheep, budding at the garden fence Nell had built badly and defended fiercely. There was laundry on the line, and a woman moving among it, and a child's voice carrying up the slope in the particular pitch of a song that had no tune and no end. He turned to the 2 graves beside him, the old ones, worn smooth by years, and the newer one, Amos's, the grass on it green and rooted now instead of raw. It held, Caleb said quietly to the miner in the ground. Your word and mine both it held. He did not say it like a man boasting. He said it like a man setting down a weight he had carried so long he had forgotten it was heavy. The trouble had ended 6 weeks past, in a courtroom that smelled of dust and pine, when the circuit judge had laid the tin locket's assay note beside Amos's true claim paper, the one Caleb had carried folded against his chest since the night at the gate, and set both against the sheaf Rourke's lawyers had produced. It had not taken a clever man to see it then. The ink on Rourke's papers was too new. The signatures were another man's hand pretending to be a dead one. And the filed claim, the real one, said in Amos's own cramped letters that his stake and his daughter alike were left to the keeping of whatever honest man would have them. Sheriff Doll had done the rest. Rourke was in the territorial jail at Cheyenne now, awaiting a trial that would not go his way, his velvet worn clean off him. The silver vein, for it was silver, and it was rich, had been placed in trust in Nell's name, to come to her when she was grown, watched over by the bank and the court, and by nobody Caleb would have to shake hands with more than twice a year. She'll have a fortune when she's a woman, Mara had said the night the papers were signed, spreading them flat on the kitchen table and smoothing them with the side of her hand. She's got one now, Caleb had answered, and meant the roof and the lamb and the 2 of them, and Mara had understood because she always did. There had been a time, and not long past, when the word fortune would have meant the vein to him too silver in the dark rock, weight enough to buy a man's whole life over. He had learned different. He had learned it in a cold barn at midnight and a courtroom that smelled of pine and a bed that had been empty for one terrible night and was never going to be empty again. What a man owned was not the thing worth keeping. What kept him was. He put his hat back on and started down the hill. Old Pate was on the porch with his bad leg propped on a nail keg and a whittling knife in his good hand, producing shavings and no discernible object. "You been up there talking to dead men again?" Pate observed. "I have." They answer. "Not in words." "Smart of 'em." Pate turned the wood over, frowned at it, and kept cutting. The fire that Rourke's men had set had caught him across the shoulder and hip, and for a bad week they had not known if he would keep the leg. He had kept it. He walked with a stick now and complained about it with a relish that told everyone how glad he was to be walking at all. "Barn's done, case you was wonderin'. Boys from town hung the last of the loft this mornin' while you was moonin' about on that hill." Caleb looked. The new barn stood square and pale against the older buildings, its raw lumber not yet weathered gray, smelling of pitch and sawdust, and the labor of 30 neighbors who 6 months ago had crossed the street to avoid speaking to him. He had not asked them to come. They had come anyway, the day after the trial, wagons full of tools and women full of pie, and they had raised the walls in 2 days and eaten him near out of house and pantry, and left the place better than the fire had found it. "I'll thank Hollies for the loft," Caleb said. "You'll thank him by not saying anything and letting him think you did it yourself. That's how you two been friends 30 years without ever once talking." Pate pointed the knife at him. "Girl's been asking for you, something about the gate. Won't tell me what, only you." Nell was waiting at the ranch gate with her hands behind her back, and the particular gravity of a child holding a secret too large for her. She was taller than she had been in the fall. The wariness that had lived in her like a second skeleton was gone. She stood square now, planted, the way children stand when they know the ground under them will not be pulled away. She still had the doll, she would have the doll for years yet, but it rode in the crook of her arm now instead of clutched at her chest like a shield. "I got an idea," she announced, "and I need the knife, the good one, not the little one." "What for?" "I'll show you if you say yes." "That's not how saying yes works." "It's how mine works." She lifted her chin at him, and there was so much of Amos in the set of that jaw, and something now that was purely her own, forged in this house. "Please, Pa." She said it plainly, without weighing it first, the way she had been saying it for 2 weeks now, Pa, easy as breathing, as though she had always had one and only just remembered. The first time she had said it, she had gone red to the ears and watched his face to see if she had done wrong. He had not trusted his voice to answer. He had only put his hand on her head, and she had leaned into it, and that had been the whole of the conversation. He got the knife. She led him to the gate post, the big weathered one that had held the ranch's name board since before he'd bought the place, and she pressed her small finger to the wood. "Here," she said, "3 names, yours and Ma's and mine, so anybody comes up the road knows whose place it is." She frowned, considering. "So nobody can ever say different. So it's on the wood and not just on paper, 'cause paper—" She stopped. She had learned this winter what paper could and could not do, and it had marked her. "Paper burns," Caleb finished for her gently. "Would you have to mean?" "Would you have to mean?" she agreed, satisfied. So he knelt at the gatepost in the spring light and let her guide the knife where she wanted it, her hand over his, and they cut the letters deep, C and M and N, the 3 of them side by side in the grain where weather could not lift them, and no man with a folded page could ever argue them away. Mara found them there when the shadows had gone long, the 2 of them dusty and pleased with themselves, Nell narrating the crookedness of the letters as though it were a virtue. "They're supposed to lean," Nell was insisting. "It means they're friendly." "They lean because your father can't cut a straight line," Mara said. But she came and looked, and she ran her thumb over the fresh-cut M, over her own initial standing between the 2 people she had chosen and been chosen by, and Caleb watched something move behind her eyes that she did not put into words. "It's a fine gate," she said at last. "It's a friendly gate," Nell corrected. "It's a friendly gate," Mara allowed, and pulled the girl in against her side and reached her free hand out until Caleb took it, and the 3 of them stood in the last of the light and looked at their names in the wood. Supper was loud. It was a thing Caleb still marveled at, that a house could be loud and it could be good. That noise was not always the prelude to loss. Pate told a story about a mule he had owned in '71 that grew longer and less true every time he told it. Nell corrected details she could not possibly have known. Mara laughed at both of them and made a dish of something Caleb could not have named and would have eaten a mountain of. Afterward, when the plates were done and Pate had limped off to the bunkhouse, and the lamp was turned low. Nell fell asleep at the table with her cheek on her arms and her doll fallen sideways beside her. Caleb carried her up. She weighed nothing and everything. He laid her in her bed, a real bed now, in a real room, not a corner and a blanket. And Mara drew the quilt to her chin and set the doll where the girl's arm would find it in the night. She used to sleep like she expected the floor to open, Mara murmured. Look at her now. Nell slept like a stone, like a child who had never in her life had a reason to sleep any other way. It was a lie the room told over her, and it was a lie they had all worked half a year to make true, and now it was simply true. Caleb crouched by the bed. He put his rough hand light on the crown of her head, the way he had that first morning, and he brought his voice down to nothing, to the low place he kept for words that mattered too much to be heard by anyone but the one they were for. You're mine, he told the sleeping girl. You were mine at the gate, and you're mine tonight, and you'll be mine when you're grown and gone and back again. No paper, no man, not ever. That's the whole of it, and it's yours to keep. He straightened. Good night, Nell. She did not wake. She only sighed, deep and untroubled, and burrowed further into the warm. Mara was waiting in the doorway. He came to her, and she took his hand, and they stood a moment looking at the small shape in the bed and the lamp guttering gold on the wall. You gave a dying man your word, she said quietly. You didn't have to give me anything, and you gave me all of this. I keep my word, Caleb said. But you I chose. She turned her face up to him in the dim, and there was no strategy left in it, no courthouse, no folded page, nothing but the plain fact of the two of them and the child breathing easy between the walls he had built, and she had made a home. Come to bed, she said. It's ours now, all of it. He pulled the door most of the way shut, leaving the crack of light Nell liked, and he went with his wife down the hall of the full and living house. And outside in the dark at the head of the road, 3 names stood cut deep in the gatepost, leaning, friendly, and true, telling anyone who came up the valley in the years ahead exactly whose place this was, and who belonged, and that the man who kept it had, in the end, kept everything.